What's going on? Hey, it's the Outside the Cockpit post-race show presented by the Intermission Sports for the Turkish Grand Prix. I'm Sam, joined by TJ to hear. How's it going today, TJ?
It's going pretty good. What a race this morning. What a race.
Yes, indeed. It was quite the race. I mean, like compared to other wet races, it didn't really provide that when you consider like a bang of a race, because the big issue was it wasn't consistent rain coming down. Obviously, it was raining in the morning, early on in the morning, but the track was continually staying wet, but there was no more added rain onto it. That's why they stayed on the inters, and I think that's why they were able to stay on the inters so long. For some people, at least like Esteban Ocon, who lasted about 58 laps before coming to an all. I think he ended up finishing P10, so I think that was, I mean, like he still finished in the points, but not where he would want to obviously finish if he had pitted for tires. So
yeah, that was the real thing. I was knowing about if to switch and then when to switch. I mean, it was always going to be a tricky question, and there was some hope that it would be dry enough for slicks to go on, but that obviously didn't end up being the case because there was a bit more rain midway through the race, and that really forced everyone to stay on intermediates. Whether or not to make the switch or not then became the question. But it was really interesting to see that a lot of people went for different strategies on when to change, and that really shook things up quite a bit.
no, definitely. Compared to when you see when Verstappen came in, I think Verstappen was the first one to pit out of the big teams in terms of Mercedes, Red Bull, or Ferrari. Verstappen first came in, he kind of dropped back a bit. Then Bottas came back in, and they both held the position. Leclerc stayed out, so he was leading the race for a while. But then his tires kind of dipped down and said, we have to pit, So they waited, they pitted finally after Bottas overtook him, and then Verstappen as well dropped down. He dropped down to second. So it was really interesting again. And like obviously Aston Martin was the one team that kind of got it all wrong when you talk about it, because I think David Crofty, they said that the benchmark for Pirelli was saying around 133 in terms of when they could, when cars were lapping around 133, they could switch to slicks. Like it was considered to be dry enough, or they were getting those fast enough tire times. But we saw clearly with the added rain, Aston Martin just got it all wrong in terms of the strategy. Vettel did one lap, not even, could barely keep it out there. So
yeah, it was kind of what we saw with Lando Norris last time out in Russia. He was just sliding all over the place. That clearly was the wrong call. Yeah, I'm not sure what sort of caused them to think that now would be a good time for slicks. Maybe it was that they didn't anticipate the rain, but I'm not sure how that could have played into their decision.
Yeah, clearly.
Because they had the radar as everyone else did. So yeah. I'm not sure what they were thinking there.
Yeah, they weren't working off any less of a budget in terms of like with the information that they had in terms of the weather radar. And like, unless the guy was just like, oh no, let's just, try for mediums and try for slicks and see what happens. It was a big gamble, and it did ended up costing him points in the race as well, which was big. So, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to say that it's, it was kind of what we saw a similar sort of situation, not only last time out in Russia with Lando Norris, but a couple of years ago in Hockenheim, when it was sort of similar conditions. Really, it was about knowing when to switch from the wets to the inters or to slicks, and it was Stroll who pulled off the early move to slicks, and that really helped him out. And then that sort of told everyone that slicks might not be the worst idea right now. So, different times and different tire calls, that really does change everything, especially with changing conditions.
No, exactly. And one thing as well that we talk about is Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes strategy call near the end of the race. It was around it was lap 42 or 43. He said, no, let's come in. Like they said, you need to come in to switch to inters because your tires are balding. And his tires were balding. He said, no, we'll stay out. They stayed out to lap 51. Then he came in pitted and lost 2 places to Leclerc and Perez as well, and almost lost out to Gasly near the end. So that, again, you look at it now and you look back, it's like, okay, was that the right move? But I think it was in end, because they were taking damage control. Because if they didn't pit, like you see Ocon, yeah, he finished P10, but who knows if Hamilton could have slid off, lost traction anywhere and lost more than, just 2 places. He could have slid back to 7th, 8th, and that's huge in the drivers, constructors, and the drivers fight and the constructors fight as well, which is big.
Yeah, I mean, because now Verstappen retakes the lead, and he's now leading by 6 points. And Mercedes, they're still leading by a chunk in the constructors, but it's barely over a race win. There's 6 races left in the season, so that this could be big. I mean, the right call was to either pit earlier, which was the correct call in hindsight, or to stay out, because at that point, when you're pitting with 8 laps to go, you've pretty much just given up all hope. It's like saying, oh, we made a mistake and we're trying very hard to correct it, but we tried too hard and that makes it even worse. But I mean, the worst call possible was to stay out and go all the way, as we saw what happened with Esteban Ocon. He did manage to finish 10th. He did climb a couple places in the race, but that's only because other drivers spun and slid off and had penalties. But I mean, it's not easy to drive on those kind of tires in those kind of conditions. So well done to both of them for making it as long as they did. But the correct call, as we now know, was to come in earlier and change to a new set of intermediate tires. But I mean, it's moments like these that could define a championship, with it being so close as it is, and that's going to really be interesting when we get to Abu Dhabi.
No, exactly. Down to the last possible race and see how I think in this championship year, every race decision or every strategy decision from either Red Bull or Mercedes, we'll look back and be like, okay, what happened in this race? Or what about this race? What about that race? And like in terms of at the end of everything and like who becomes the winner. Because the point gap right now is 36 points, which is just over technically considered a race win. And like, for me personally, it's like 36 points as a Red Bull fan is a lot, considering as well there's 2 drivers, right? Like Bottas getting the race win was huge, because if Bottas doesn't get the race win, that's a massive 1-2 finish in a double podium for Red Bull, which they did get as well, which was big for them. Consider, I'm trying to think the last time they got a double podium, or maybe it might have been like
Paul Ricard, I believe.
It was Paul Ricard. Sorry, yeah, Paul Ricard. So this year it wasn't that like Regards, it was a good 8 or 9 races ago, because that was the last time that actually Checo was on the podium, was when it was a 1-2 finish, which was another big thing as well. But in terms of the race strategy for Mercedes, it was the right decision that they made. But I think in the end, it was a little bit too late for them to make an effect. If he had just pitted a few laps earlier to get his tires up to temperature, because what ended up happening is Lewis Hamilton, he pitted to the new inters, and then because of like 7 laps to go, okay, hurry, like, push. And then he pretty much just ruined his tires. Like he didn't even let them get up to temperature, where he kind of like overcooked them and they became kind of dead again. And he just wasted a brand new set of inters. So,
yeah. And I think going back to him staying out for as long as he did on the original set, I mean, part of that was because of his battle with Sergio Perez. I mean, we saw it midway through the race. It was a fantastic battle between the two of them, with Hamilton fighting for position. I mean, you see that and you think, this is what you want to see. This is why Sergio Perez was hired. And Christian Horner said that after the race. This is why we got him. And, it was fantastic to see 2 of them going into a tight corner and fighting for position with a switchback made in turn 1. I mean, that could have contributed to Hamilton's tires being as messed up as they were towards the end of his first stint before he came in. I mean, had the overtake been a bit cleaner and had there not been a battle, he might have been able to stay out or convince the team that staying out was the right call. But then eventually he would have realized that, yeah, he had to come in. But it was just great to see the 2 of them going at it, and that could be another big defining factor in the championship, because Hamilton only got 10 points and it could have been 12 or 15. He could have even gotten a podium if the tires had managed to hold on.
No, exactly. That was excellent defending from Sergio Perez, and that's what the difference is when you look at the difference between Sergio Perez and possibly Alex Albon, in terms of just the experience and the racecraft that Sergio Perez has in terms of defending, especially racing against Hamilton. Like, he's been around for a long time. He's raced against Hamilton in past in different cars throughout his years of switching cars. So it's great to see, and that's like Christian Horner said as well. That's why Perez is there, to kind of hold off Hamilton, and that's what he did. He did hold back Hamilton. I think, to your point as well, that did probably play a difference in terms of his tire life, because obviously when you're battling someone near the back and you're in that dirty air, you're tired and you're getting close and you're getting close in contact, your tires can contact as well. But it was great to see. And I'm glad as well that there was no, even like when the moment when Hamilton pushed off Perez almost into the pit lane, there was nothing to like, that was just racing. That was just hard racing. I like that from both sides, seeing like even being like a Red Bull fan, it was great to see. And like, obviously it was a great move by Perez to like on the switchback to fight back and get back into fourth place. So that's what we want to see. We want to see hard, exciting racing with, no penalties, less penalties and less so, because penalties just ruin it. Which is something that we could probably mention as well. The fact that Fernando Alonso got a penalty and so did Pierre Gasly. Like, what do you like that opening lap in terms of that contact? Do you think that penalty was fair for Pierre Gasly?
No, it wasn't. It was not fair at all. And the stewards you could see there was Perez on the inside and then Gasly was in the middle and Alonso was trying to be really ambitious and go for a double overtake on the outside into turn one. And Gasly really didn't have anywhere to go. So if Perez is on the inside, Gasly's here, Alonso's here trying to overtake just on the limits of the track. If he leaves a little bit, if one of them leaves a little bit more room for Alonso, if Checo maybe could have gone in a bit further, maybe Gasly could have gone in a bit further, Alonso could have gone in a bit further, maybe be inside, but no driver is going to give up room, especially on the first lap. And so had Gasly not touched Alonso would have gone to the outside and he would have lost those places anyway. But the stewards generally have been more lenient about first lap incidents than incidents else in later stages of the race.
Later stages of the race, exactly. Yeah.
So I'm not sure why they decided to give Gasly a penalty at all. And then in the same lap, it was Alonso touching Mick Schumacher, and then he gets a 5-second penalty.
Alonso was just like, he was being super aggressive to the nature of point where it's like, I don't care, you deserve to get a penalty. Because when he hit Mick Schumacher, I believe it was Mick Schumacher that he hit, it was like, what are you doing? I was like, you're an experienced race driver, and that was like a rookie mistake that he made.
Yeah,
where he just drove way too hard in the corner. Yeah. And then he just tapped him, and it was just like, how is this? And I'm like, honestly, I was like, Pierre Gasly, he recovered nicely from the penalty. He was able to stay ahead of Lando Norris, finish P6, which was great for AlphaTauri as well, ahead of Lando Norris. So he was able to, obviously take that penalty within merits and not affect him too hard in terms of the race, because we have seen other penalties where it does affect them. But I think the race conditions really played into the tires and pit stops. Like, it was just a very odd race, because you see other races where a time penalty majorly affects, like in a dry race, it's massive, the difference in terms of the time penalty between a wet and dry race, how much it affects each driver. So that was huge as well.
Yeah, and then when you see Gasly getting a 5-second penalty, and then when we saw what happened with Fernando Alonso and Mick Schumacher, at that point you knew he was also going to get a penalty as well. So, it was really unfortunate because, like I said earlier, the stewards do tend to take a bit more of a relaxed approach when it comes to first lap incidents. Cars are bunched up. They know that incidents can and usually do happen. So, why they decided to give both of them a penalty is still a mystery, because there really was no room for Gasly. He literally didn't have anywhere to go. He said on the radio that he got sandwiched by Perez and Alonso. So, there was always going to be a bit of a tussle there. And Alonso has been really aggressive throughout his career, as he's always been. He's won a lot of races, he's won many championships, but he's always been a bit aggressive, and that's gotten him into trouble a couple of times. And we saw it once again here. He was tagged by Gasly, and then he hit Schumacher in turn later in the lap. So
yeah, I think David Crofty perfectly illustrated it. He said, he's just tagging every driver along the way. He's trying to touch it. And as well, like, it's funny because it's like you hear that quote like all the time, you have to leave a space, and yet at this time there was no more space in terms of the inside line for Gasly. So
yeah,
exactly. Let's talk about as well, who is your most impressive driver? Because there was some great drives from today. You talk about Carlos Sainz, P19 to P9. I'm trying to think of anyone else. Obviously Lewis Hamilton also from 11th to 5th. He had a good race as well. But Valtteri Bottas, I think, it's undermined as well. Obviously, he started on pole position. He ran a good race. he finished the race win. It was World Porridge Day, what is considered. So I think that's what the big thing was, because he's not the greatest driver in the wet conditions, but in terms of it, the fact that it was World Porridge Day, I think it all adds up now. But who is your most impressive driver?
Well, it was Carlos Sainz. There's no denying that. I mean, he was supposed to start P20, but then Daniel Ricciardo took an engine penalty this morning, so he would start P20. So that bumped him up a spot to P19. And he was just fighting his way through the grid. And that's what we've known Carlos Sainz to do for a long time. He's done that before so well. And, for him to finish P8 from starting 19th in these conditions with, potentially changing conditions and changing tires, and changing conditions and all that. It was fantastic to see. And that was really nice to see. And that's coming from me as a Ferrari fan. That was really awesome. And it helps Ferrari get some points back in the fight with McLaren for P3. I did like Valtteri Bottas holding it in the front, which was always great. And this might very well be his last ever win with Mercedes, unless things progress further later on in the season.
No, he's just going to win every race from now on and still win the championship. He's just going to yeah, no, exactly. That's what's going to happen. He's just from Turkey on to USA to everywhere. He's just going to win every race now. And it's just going to be like,
steal the championship from Lewis and Max. But
exactly. Yeah.
Getting back to Carlos Sainz. I mean, he's ever since he was dropped by Red Bull and Renault, he's really turned a corner. And this was another example of it today. I mean, this is why Ferrari grabbed him when they realized that he was available. So it was just another fantastic drive for him. And he could very well be a Ferrari driver for a while.
I mean, that's the thing as well. What Ferrari is doing in terms of, before I go on to my most impressive driver, is they're aiming for youth. And that's a huge thing in Formula One as well, as having young drivers at the helm. Because they have Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, who are both now, they're more experienced. They've been in F1 for a few years now. They do have some experience, especially Carlos Sainz coming from the Red Bull team and Toro Rosso to being promoted to the first team as well, and then obviously moving to Renault and McLaren, and then now to Ferrari. So he's been around the block in terms of the teams. But it's good to have a somewhat youthful team because you can have that. If you have success, it's like, okay, he's not like, an older driver that's only going to be around for a few more years. Like, not saying a few more seasons before he retires as well. Like Fernando Alonso, he's been around for he's 40. He might race another 2 or 3 seasons, but he might call it quits as well. That's what I mean in terms of the other things. So you look at some teams with older, more experienced drivers, it can be a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing as well, because then you bring in a new young driver like Red Bull might have to do in a couple of years, and where is that going to go in terms of their team success? But in terms of the most impressive driver for me, I had I wouldn't say, I'm trying to think. I think Carlos Sainz for me as well would be the most impressive driver. I was really impressed with Valtteri Bottas, but the fact that he just started on pole was just like, and considering as well, that Istanbul Park in Turkey, I think it's like 9 out of 10 races, or the past number of races, the winner has been from pole position, because it's such a dominant position to be starting from. So, but for Carlos Sainz, great performance. It was great to see him do well, and for him to slice right up the field. He had really great pace early on in the race in terms of getting past a lot of the cars. I mean, like, that Ferrari was looking quick all weekend, considering Charles Leclerc was up in P3 and keeping pace with Max Verstappen, just like 2 seconds behind him. So look out, in other future races. Like, Ferrari is back, and I'm excited for what 2022 brings as well for them. So.
I wouldn't say Ferrari's back. I mean, I would say they've turned a corner. They've got Carlos Sainz. He was with Toro Rosso, then he went to Renault, and now he's at Ferrari. So, I mean, they've definitely turned a corner, but I wouldn't say they're back. I think, like you said, 2022, we'll have to wait and see what everything turns out to be. I mean, but they are definitely on the rise, and they definitely do deserve where they are right now. They are fighting McLaren, and they're not at the pace of Red Bull or Mercedes yet, but hopefully they will be by the time next season rolls around.
I mean, like, it's going to be interesting as well, talking about the 2022 season and the regulations in terms of what teams are pushing for and developing really hard for the 22 car, because obviously Red Bull focusing on this year in the championship, having a really solid car that can challenge Mercedes. How do they look next year in 2022 in terms of, obviously, I know they're developing the 2022 car because they've already have it, like, they develop it for years and years ahead. But in terms of the minor details, they're like, okay, we need to make these minor key differences to, be competitive next year and the next, 10 years, because that's the era that they're heading into as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting because the regulations were sort of designed to sort of curb Mercedes' stranglehold on the Formula One championship, and now with Red Bull focusing their attention on this year to try and give Max Verstappen a title before next year rolls around, and then with Sergio Perez not getting any younger as well, so that does leave an interesting power vacuum that could open up with McLaren improving really nicely, Ferrari improving quite nicely, and other teams focusing more on 2022 than they are this season. So, I mean, because that's also considering the cars are largely carryovers from last season, because they pushed back the regulations due to COVID. So,
no, exactly.
It's going to be interesting next season to see what happens with these new with the team's development focus, and it'll be really easy to see early on who started too late, who focused more on 2022 than 2021, who started too late, who
didn't focus at all,
who didn't do enough,
exactly,
who did a lot. And I mean, that's why Haas is so far down the grid. They said this is going to be just a transitional year. We're just focusing on 2022. Yeah, they wrote off this year. So it depends. I mean, obviously Haas have a lower budget than a lot of the teams do. But I mean, it will be interesting to see where Haas in particular find themselves next season, given that they've focused entirely on next year's car.
But what's interesting as well with the 2022 regulations, and it was even instilled this year technically, is the cost cap at 145 million. Now, obviously, for smaller teams, their budget is like 125 million. So I guess that gives them a bit more leeway in terms of like, okay, if we can get more money, then yeah. But what it's really supposed to do is those bigger teams like, Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari that have those $400 or $500 million budgets, they can be brought down immensely now. And it's like, okay, we don't have like this much money we can't, be as dominant. So it will, even for the midfield teams as well, 2022 could see, McLaren, AlphaTauri, like who knows, are going to win races next year. And who's going to be like, not saying Mercedes is going to like totally fall off a cliff and they're just going to be not dominant, but it will be a question mark to see where the next season will go in terms of the regulations as well, for sure.
Yeah, and we've already gotten some like massively surprising results from this year and last year, obviously with Esteban Ocon winning in Hungary, and then Pierre Gasly winning at Monza, and then McLaren springing a 1-2 in Monza this year. So, I mean, there have already been some surprise results. Yes, a lot of those were as a result of odd circumstances,
or crashes or whatever. Crashes. But regardless, they do have the pace. That's the key thing.
Yeah, and you look at teams like Williams as well. They were massively struggling before Dorilton Capital came in and gave them some cash injection, and now they're all of a sudden fighting for points. Russell getting a podium, yes, because of Saturday qualifying, because Sunday, well, we all know what happened at Spa.
Yes.
But I mean, Williams are also turning a curve. So how they're going to be in next season as well, that's going to be interesting, especially now with Alex Albon coming into the fold and George Russell going to the main Mercedes team.
Yes, George Russell, the Mercedes. I'm so excited. I mean, like, I feel bad for Bottas because I feel like he gets underrated. Like when he was during the race today, and it's like he's only got 10 career race wins over the fact that he's been in Mercedes now for like 4. I mean, again, you're Lewis Hamilton's teammate, so it's very tough to beat him. But it's like, could he not have like maybe like 15 more? Because like Max Verstappen has like, I think like 15, or like he's close. He's just above Bottas in total of his total career race wins.
17.
17 race wins, and he's got like 50 plus podiums. But then again, that's different because the podium's a lot easier to get than, getting to an actual race win. But I just got to, I mean, Bottas, it's good for him to move on to Alfa Romeo and, have a new environment there, a new team, and just not be in Lewis Hamilton's shadow and not have James Vowles not always talking to him as well. So
yeah, and then we've seen what a new environment and a less pressure environment can do to drivers. You see Seb Vettel, he's doing quite well at Aston Martin now. He started off in a bit of a rough patch, but he's done genuinely well now.
He's loving life, man.
He's a completely different person. He's a completely different driver. It's great to see his transformation because, I mean, his last season at Ferrari was just terrible. And it's not as bad for Bottas this season at Mercedes because he's picked up podiums. He's now got the race win, but I mean, you can tell that ever since it was clear that he was the number 2 driver when he came in, you can tell that it didn't sit well with him. And
yeah,
I mean, it was always going to happen because, I mean, no way were Mercedes going to get a second number 1 because they did not want a repeat of what happened between Lewis and Nico Rosberg.
Exactly, yeah.
So it was always clear that it was going to be the case, but it still took a toll on him because when he first signed, he did want to beat Lewis Hamilton to a world championship, but that unfortunately just never happened because they, just after he signed, that's when Ferrari rebounded. Seb Vettel challenged him for a few years, and then when they sort of fell off and were replaced by Red Bull, at that point Mercedes was solely focused on Lewis Hamilton, and at that point there was no way that Bottas was ever going to fight for a world championship.
No, exactly, for sure. And I think the last thing that I will talk about as well before we wrap up the show is kind of a interesting. So it's like when you hear like Valtteri, it's James, and the same energy I feel is when David Crofty says 2 seconds, Ted. I always feel bad for Ted Kravitz, always trying to get a message in. It goes 2 seconds, Ted, and then he just like makes him go quiet. I always think that's just like the 2 clips that just gave off the same energy when it's Valtteri, it's James, and 2 seconds, Ted, because they just, I mean, like I feel for him. It's like I want to say something, or like you want to like, feel for him, but that's just the last thing I wanted to get in there before.
Yeah, I mean, it's different scenarios because these guys, they're, when Crofty holds off Ted because it's obviously radio comes in, and that's more, and that's obviously very important to hear. But I feel like it's different scenarios in that case because when you're fighting for a race win instead of when you're sort of delivering a show to a worldwide audience, I feel like they're different scenarios.
Oh no, yeah, they're different scenarios, but I just feel in terms of like whenever he hears that, it always just gives him like flashbacks. I think it's more not for like, it's more for Ted. It's not for in terms of the total same energy, but I feel like Ted definitely understands. He understands exactly. Again, it's an important radio call because that radio call, they're trying to, give the best broadcast out there, and that's what we want. And for Valtteri, it's James. It's an important radio call as well. But I definitely think there's been instances where Valtteri's just gotten treated so poorly, where it's like I think remember the one point, it's like, oh, you can't pass Lewis, but you can drive alongside him to see if he has damage. Or like there was just certain moments where like, oh, you have to abort the fastest lap because, we want Lewis to get it to fight for the championship for him to, in terms of the constructor. But it's like, well, okay, if he gets the point, it's still going to go to the constructor's point. The only difference is it goes to Lewis, which is in for the title fight because they want to win that double. They want that double world champion. That's what they ultimately want, which makes sense. But there's just certain instances where I do feel bad for Bottas. But that's pretty much going to do it for our show. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out theintermissionsports.com for more content. We'll be back in a few weeks, not until October 22nd to 24th is when we'll be in America, the USA, for the American Grand Prix at Austin, Texas. So have a nice Sunday. Happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you then.